In this video, we're going to find out what is the ultimate edge function provider in 2023. Edge functions have definitely increased in popularity in the last few years. As the market is starting to see this increase in popularity, we're also starting to see a number of additional hosting providers starting to offer edge function capabilities. Now, in case you weren't aware, an edge function is basically a bit of code that lives in the cloud that allows you to make HTTP requests to it, and it's going to return some sort of data. Now, the special thing about edge functions is the location of that bit of code. It's worth pointing out that edge functions aren't the only type of cloud function. It is highly likely that you've also come across the term serverless function. And you might be wondering, are they the same thing? Are they different? Now, the code that you need to create in order to create a serverless or edge function is exactly the same. There's not really anything new to learn there. The difference comes from how the function is triggered. In a serverless setup, you'll create some code, you'll host it in the cloud, and that function will live in a data center somewhere located in the world. And typically you assign the location when you create the function. So let's say I've created my serverless function. It's living in America. I'm in London, and in order to call data from my API, I need to make a request from London to America and back again. And that's going to take X amount of time. Now, the difference in an edge function is my bit of code, instead of living in a single data center, is going to be copied into an edge network. Woo! So edge network, you can think of it as a CDN that has nodes dotted across the world. And the theory is that the less distance the requests have to make, the quicker it's going to become. So in an edge setup, what's going to happen is I'm going to make a request from London. I'm going to hit the node in London or England. That means that my request is traveling less distance. It's going to be quicker.
Round one.
Broadly speaking, we have two different types of edge function provider. First off, we have the big boys, the enterprise level players. And this is where the likes of the AWS, the Azure, and the Google Cloud Platform comes into play. Now, yes, all of these providers offer some sort of edge side function capability. They're all pretty good. However, the downside is they can often cost quite a bit. Also, it often feels like you need to be Stephen Hawking's older, much cleverer brother just to understand how these platforms work. Now, trust me, once I did a 2-week course specifically just to become Azure certified, and we didn't even touch edge functions in it. There's so much in these platforms that it can often be too overwhelming to learn. Now, we also have a second category of edge function provider. Now, these providers are more focused towards front-end developers, and their aim is to try and reduce as much friction as possible in the build process. And this is the category that we're going to be focusing in on today. By the end of this video, you are going to learn what the gold standard is when it comes to these front-end focused edge function providers. I'm going to compare the CLI tools, how easy it is to set up, the pricing tiers, performance, and pretty much anything else I think you'll care about in order to make a good informative decision.
Fight.
The first provider that we're going to review is called Cloudflare. I've been using Cloudflare as a CDN for over a decade, and in 2018 it released Cloudflare Workers. So Cloudflare Workers is Cloudflare's function as a service model that works over its edge network. Now, Cloudflare has over 200 nodes in its CDN layer. This means that when you create a function inside of a worker, it's going to be distributed all around the world. If you want to create and work with a Cloudflare worker locally, you're going to need to install the Cloudflare CLI tool, which is called Wrangler. After installing the Wrangler CLI, you can create a Cloudflare worker using the init command. Now, this command is going to generate all the files required for us to work with a Cloudflare worker locally. Before we move on, I think it's worth pointing out that I did notice performance issues with Wrangler CLI. Now, when I compare it to the other competitors' CLI tools, I definitely found Wrangler to be a lot slower. So for instance, in a competitor CLI, I could log in about 5 seconds. And with Wrangler, sometimes it took me 30 to 60 seconds to log in. So when you're working with something on a daily basis, it's definitely worth taking note that it might take you a little bit longer with Wrangler. Running Wrangler init is going to generate a number of files for you, which will look similar to this. Now, the important one from the files it generates is wrangler.toml. And wrangler.toml is basically your Cloudflare worker configuration file. Now there's loads of things that you can add in here. Out of the box you get things like name, and this is going to be the name of your edge function which will appear in the Cloudflare UI. We also have main, and this is the property which allows you to point to where your code file exists. In my project, you can see that I've got a folder called source, and in here we've got index.js. Now the function itself, the Cloudflare function structure is slightly different compared to some of the other options. Down the bottom we've got an export with some curly braces, and at the top we've got a var. Now this is the code which is generated by Cloudflare, so var let const, they could update that. I can use the Wrangler dev command in order to test my function locally. After making your amends, you can push your worker into Cloudflare by first logging in. Now this process does take about 60 seconds. It's going to open up a browser tab. It's going to ask me to log in. Then after logging in eventually, what we can do is a Wrangler publish, and it's going to deploy all of our files into Cloudflare. We are now inside the Cloudflare UI. And in terms of the number of features offered just for edge-side functions, I'd say that Cloudflare probably wins. After you log into Cloudflare, you can easily see the essential telemetry about your function. So we can see things like the requests or the duration of your functions. We can see the triggers, the logs, we can see the deployment, and we can mess around with some settings. Now, personally, I think where Cloudflare gets really interesting is around this quick edit button. And where Cloudflare differs from some of the competitors is it has this default online editor. And on the side, you can also notice that we have a Postman tester. So it's possible to create and edit your function via the UI. Now the testing tool is pretty good. We can put in our worker address, we can put in get post requests, we can add in headers, we can send things, we can make sure that we get a response, and being able to debug your function from the UI is very, very, very useful. However, and I'm really sad to say this, that this tool is really buggy. And let me show you why. Now let's say that I go back to my main page. What you'll notice is this button right now is grayed out. And despite how long I wait, it does nothing. And in a lot of instances, the only time to get this up and running is to click refresh. Now, after clicking refresh, hopefully the button's editable again, but that is an annoying quirk. Now, another annoying quirk is the actual text editor doesn't work very well. You probably won't be able to hear this, but I'm tapping on my keyboard right now and absolutely nothing is happening. Now, this is really annoying. And as you can see, I can add code right down the bottom. I can't add code anywhere else. However, if I do some copying and pasting, add that to my clipboard, you can see that I can start updating things using copy and paste. I really, really, really like the ability of editing functions via the UI. However, it needs to work to be useful. As you would expect, Cloudflare comes with a free tip. So if you're building a small hobby project or something which doesn't have to do more than 100,000 requests per month, which is quite a lot, and all your functions are running quite quickly because you only get a 10 millisecond CPU compute time within the free tier. The paid tier starts from $5 a month and will obviously increase the more usage you have. Now for your $5 a month, I think you get 1 million requests per month, and you can get an additional 1 million requests for every 15 cents. In the paid tier, a function can run up to 30 seconds. So if you have these long running tasks, then you are going to have to go down the paid plan. The second provider in the list is Netlify. And while I give you some background information about Netlify, let's see how easy it is to create an edge-side function locally. Netlify is a great all-in-one platform. It offers free hosting of up to 500 sites, free SSL certs, A/B testing, member management, a form builder, and lots more. Netlify released its Edge function service towards the end of 2020. You should definitely not get this mixed up with its serverless function offering that was released in 2018. And if you fail to read the docs properly, do not be surprised if you accidentally end up creating the wrong type of function. Don't say that I haven't warned you. Another interesting thing to note about Netlify is that it's a service that is built on top of AWS, meaning that when you create a function in Netlify, essentially it's built on top of an AWS Lambda. Now, the aim of Netlify is to help front-end developers release code and functions with as little friction as possible. And it does this really, really well. I mean, why else would you use Netlify rather than just use AWS directly? I can also personally vouch for Netlify's service. And if you head over to my GitHub, you'll see that over 100 of my hobby sites are hosted using it. Welcome to the Netlify UI, and hopefully you'll see straight away that on a per project basis, Netlify offers way more capabilities than everything else. So aside from having normal web hosting, we do serverless and edge functions in here. Now, we also have identity for member management. We also have form building. We also have media management. We have A/B testing capabilities, analytics, GraphQL. And then when it comes to Netlify, we have way more site settings compared to any of the other options. There's loads of stuff in here. I'm not going to cover it. Now, funnily enough, though, that when it comes to edge functions, we actually have the least amount of capability. So we have a log. We have a link to the docs. That is it.
You lose.
Very annoyingly, you can't view your production edge function code via the UI. Your only option is to download a zip file of all the files and view it locally. And in order to access that, we can go to the deploy tab, click on a deployment, and then at the top, you're going to see a very, very tiny down arrow. And clicking on this down arrow is going to generate a zip file, which you can download and view offline. And this is a very cumbersome way of being able to look at your files.
Round 2.
Netlify has 4 pricing tiers. So we have free, we have pro, which is $20 per user per month, business, which is $100 per user per month, and then enterprise, expensive. And in terms of edge functions alone, Netlify probably wins it in terms of requests. So with edge functions, you get 3 million a month in the free tier, and then for $20 a month, 15 million, and then business, 150 million, which is good. Now, don't forget, we also get up to 500 websites for free. We get 125K of serverless functions. We get forms, identity, media, site analytics. You basically get way, way, way more for your money. The third and final provider that I'm going to be reviewing today is Vercel. So Vercel is the maker of the mighty Next.js, the most used JavaScript framework in the world today. And they also do pretty good hosting. Vercel has been successfully offering serverless functions for a few years now, and in July 2022, it upped its game by also including edge functions into its arsenal. Now, even though this offering is pretty new, it's still very solid, and we'll find out shortly, is it the best one? Now, Vercel, just like Netlify, is built on top of AWS. So you know that it's solid, you know it's secure, and that when you're creating an edge function, you're working with AWS Lambda under the hood, which is nice. Now, just in terms of full capabilities for websites and functions, there's definitely far fewer capabilities in Vercel compared to Netlify. The next question is, how does Vercel stack up when we want to create a function locally? This is an example of the minimum amount of files that you need in order to create a Vercel edge function. I think we can agree there's not much there, which is nice. Now, the key thing is that we create a folder which is called API. Then every single file that we put in API will turn it into a function. Now, in Vercel, you can create a serverless function or you can create an edge function. And the way to set one or the other is via this config object here. So hopefully you can see we've got export const config equals runtime experimental-edge. So enabling this makes it an edge function. Deleting this turns it into a serverless function. So dead simple. And out of all the providers, this is probably the easiest one to switch between the two. In order to work with Vercel locally, you need to use the aptly named Vercel CLI tool. And the commands here are very similar to the Netlify and the Cloudflare CLI tools. So in order to get going, you need to first start with the Vercel logging command. I'm going to log in. It's going to take a few seconds. And I found that this works much quicker compared to other tools. Now I'm logged in. I can do something like a Vercel help. And from here, you can see that we have a number of options. So these options are pretty similar to all the other CLI tools, if I'm honest. So we can do deployments, we can do logins, logouts, we can pull, we can switch. There's kind of standard stuff. So in order to do a deployment, all we want to do is just Vercel, deploy. Then what should happen is we should link it to our project if it isn't, and then it's just going to push it. So this process takes about 15-20 seconds, and afterwards we can see our function live in the world. Here we are inside the Vercel UI, which I personally quite like. Now the first reason why I like it is because I'm a sucker for a dark theme. On the homepage, to access the function, it's right in front of me, single click. Now from here I can see some deployment logs, domains, if it's up, that kind of stuff. I've got the deployment logs underneath, which I can see is okay. Now if I go to the building log right here, scrolling down a little bit, you can see that we've got the generated build outputs. And you can see that we've got edge functions 1, serverless function 0. So we know that little bit of code inside that function has worked. Now inside the UI, there's not that much you can do. You can see the logs in real time, which is nice. The other thing you can do in here is actually view the source. So I can see the package JSON, I can read the project README, and sometimes it allows me to actually view the code as well, which is really cool. And this is something that you can't easily do within Netlify. The Vercel pricing model is also pretty strong. So they have a free hobby tier, they have a pro tier, which is $20 per user, and they have enterprise, which is expensive. Now, in terms of edge middleware, we get 1 million requests for free, which is way more than Cloudflare. However, you can only scale this when you go to the pro tier, and then it's 65 cents per a million. So if you need to go over 1 million, Cloudflare is probably going to be a little bit cheaper.
Final round.
So now you have a good understanding how all three providers match up. Let's think which one's the best one. So first, let's start with Cloudflare. Now, I really like the fact that you can edit a function in Cloudflare's UI, and you can't do that with Netlify or Vercel. The only issue is it didn't work. I couldn't type code into the editor, and I had to copy and paste stuff from Notepad into the UI. That is really annoying, and I think if I hadn't had to done that, maybe Cloudflare would have been the winner. Now, one great thing about Cloudflare is that if you're just looking for dedicated edge functions, they have a pretty good pricing tier. So the free tier is going to give you loads of stuff, and then after that, you just need to pay $5, which is definitely the cheapest option compared to the others. The second provider on the list was Netlify, and if I'm honest, if I was judging this solely based on total number of features, Netlify is the clear winner in this list. It's the reason why I like it so much. Now, in terms of edge function features alone, Netlify has a very, very solid offering. Now, everything worked, there was no bugs, I could upload everything quickly, and through the Netlify TOML file, you can configure things how you need it to, which is really nice. Now, I'd say the only downside of the Netlify feature was there's no way to view my function code online. I didn't have that Postman style testing tool, so I could test everything in the UI. Instead, when you're working with Netlify, you have to work locally and push everything up to Netlify. This meant that I found creating a function in Cloudflare was slightly quicker than building in Netlify. The third and final provider that we looked at was Vercel. And I'd say that in terms of edge functions, Vercel has a pretty solid offering, despite being the new kid on the block. So the CLI tool worked as I expected it to. I could push code fairly quickly. There was no bugs in the UI, and I liked the dark minimal look. Now I'd say that the one area where Vercel let itself down was around the documentation. Now, if you want to build a Next.js application with an edge function using a middleware, brilliant, there's loads of documentation. If you're planning on using Vercel with vanilla JavaScript and edge-side functions, then be prepared that there is going to be some gaps in the documentation. It's probably going to take you a little bit of head scratching to get things right, but it's not unmanageable. Now, the other thing that we should focus on is that you can't edit the functions within the UI. Now, yes, in Vercel, you can actually view the function, which is better than Netlify. However, you don't have any of that Postman style testing. So for this reason, I'm placing the UI in second position. If you force me to pick one single winner from this video, then I have to say it's you, my friend, from all the knowledge that you've gained from this video and all the research I put into it. Now, if you want to continue getting access to all my research and all my knowledge, there's one simple thing you can do right now. It'll take you a few seconds, and that is smashing on the subscribe button. Hitting subscribe helps you out, and if you want to help me out because you appreciate this video, then please click on the like button. It takes you a few seconds, it massively helps me grow this channel, so I very much appreciate it. Now, going back to the provider point, I'll probably say if I had to pick one, I'll probably pick Netlify at this point. However, if Cloudflare could get rid of all of its bugs, make the UI a bit nicer, I think Cloudflare could be a potential winner in the future. So to conclude, they're all pretty good, so pick the one that makes you happy.